Welcome to another episode of Saturday Cappuccino with the Saints. And this week we are going to continue on a bit with the Christmasy vibe as we enter into the beautiful season of Epiphany, where the light of Christ goes forth into the wider Gentile world. And we pick up the story of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph after the wise men have departed and tell the story of their flight into Egypt. And this trip to Egypt is the inspiration for this week's special topic. The word Epiphany means an appearance or a manifestation, especially of a divine being. And every year when I read the story of the Holy Family's flight to Egypt after Christmas, I always think about one of the most amazing, witnessed, photographed, and well-documented supernatural events ever to occur on earth. The apparitions of Our Lady of Zeitoun in Egypt during the years 1968 to 1971. It is a fascinating tale, and one that is not so well known in the West, as it should be. Millions of people saw the Blessed Virgin Mary numerous times over a period of 3 years in Zeitoun, a suburb of Cairo, Egypt. The documented evidence for this apparition is massive, and it really should be better known in this country than it is. This week, we will be discussing it in depth. And so settle in. This is going to be quite an amazing episode. And to start our episode, we begin with the story of the Holy Family's flight to Egypt. It occurs and comes from the second chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. And we start right after the wise men have left. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more." The Coptic Christians of Egypt have marked numerous sites in and around Cairo where tradition states that the Holy Family either stayed or traveled through during their time in Egypt. One of those sites is Zeitoun, a neighborhood in Cairo with a significant Christian population. The area holds a special place in Christian tradition, as it is believed to be located along the route the Holy Family traveled during their flight into Egypt. The Church of the Virgin Mary in Zeitoun, which you see here, which became the focal point of the apparitions we will discuss this morning, was constructed in the early 20th century and consecrated in 1924. To get us all up to speed, I found this fantastic short video documentary about the apparitions of Our Lady of Zeitoun. I hope you enjoy.
It was 1924, and Khalil Abraham was about to build a hotel in the spot in Zeitoun where the Holy Family was said to have visited more than 1900 years earlier. One night, as he slept, Abraham was visited in a dream by the Virgin Mary. "Build a church in my name," the Virgin demanded, "and a miracle will take place in the future." He did just that. Then, on April 2nd, 1968, the miracle took place. Two Muslim parking garage agents on Taman Bay Street in the Cairo suburb of Zeitoun saw a woman perched perilously on the dome of the Church of St. Mary. Thinking she was a young woman trying to kill herself, they shouted for her to come down. Then they realized that this was no ordinary woman. Soon, word spread that the Virgin Mary had returned to the Church of Zeitoun, built in an area that Mary had promised to return to after stopping at this spot to rest during the Holy Family's flight to Egypt. Bishop Marcos was among the thousands who saw the apparition of the Virgin Mary. At the time, a member of the Faculty of Engineering at Cairo University, Bishop Marcos describes what he saw in 1968.
Just behind the church, in front of the wall of the church, I think, not more than 40 or 50 meters, approximately at midnight. I have seen the vision complete, very nice, very clear. I saw the complete face, complete body, and her hands waving to bless the people. And everyone could see that she concentrated her eyes on them exactly.
Soon, thousands of Christians and Muslims alike flocked to the tiny church, including President Nasser, who was stunned by the vision. The apparition changed the politics of Egypt as Nasser developed better relation with Egyptian Christians. And of course, all who saw the apparition were overwhelmed. One who witnessed the apparition was Dr. Otto Meinardus, a member of the German Theological Association and a Harvard-trained theologian who taught at the prestigious American University in Cairo. He marveled at what he saw in the early days of the apparition, bringing many students to witness what he called the most stunning sight he had ever seen.
Well, it occurred during the first days of April that thousands and 10,000s of people, both Muslims and Christians alike, assembled in front of the Church of the Holy Virgin to see the apparition of the Virgin Mary as she appeared there on the dome. The days later, large numbers of people, both Muslims and Christians of the various denominations, assembled there and witnessed the apparition in various forms. I myself saw it numerous times with friends in my parish, with university students, and yes, there's to me no doubt about it.
Dr. Kerry Malik was among those who couldn't get enough of the holy apparition. He was among the first to see Her Holiness and returned several times.
I was standing over there near the fence and holding that iron fence as strong as I could because of the pressure of the crowd. And it was about 8:30 in the evening, and I saw a light coming out from this dome, which is the southwest dome, and the light began to increase gradually, and then suddenly the Holy Mother was standing in front of the dome. She stood there for about 15 minutes, and then she began to walk, and she stood in front of that cross, and she knelt and stood up again, and then she walked to the northern side of the church, just above the area where I was standing, and she looked at the crowd, and she blessed them, and she smiled, and I can say that I saw her teeth when she smiled. I was preparing in my mind about 7 or 8 requests from her when I saw her. One of them was to cure me from asthma, which I had for about 20 years. When I saw the Holy Mother, I found myself trembling and tears coming down my cheek. And I stood there about half an hour, and I went back to call my family who was in the other street. And when I came back, I could not reach the church because of the pressure of the crowd. Till about 11 p.m. I could manage to reach near the fence, but I was not holding anything at that time. And I saw Muslim clergyman, and he gave me his name as Mujahid, and he told me, you are trying to look, you don't see well, I will carry you. And he carried me, and when he did that, I saw the most fantastic view I ever saw in my life. I saw the Holy Mother standing. She was about double the size of the human being. She was just, I believe, in front of that dome. And she was dressed in blue and a red robe above the dress, and there was a crown of about 20 centimeters high on her head. The second time I saw her after that, it was a week later. I came a week later, it was Saturday also, and she was, I saw just half view. She was standing behind the dome, and then I saw people pointing at the moon, and I looked at the moon. I saw her face stamped on the whole face of the moon. And that was the last time I saw her in Zeitoun before I left for the United States.
The appearance of the Virgin Mary brought with it many reports of miracles, some of which were witnessed by Bishop Marcos.
We had a man who was very crippled. His hands were paralyzed and his back was bent, and he could barely speak. At approximately 7 o'clock in the evening, I saw him begin to move his hands and then his fingers, and then the rest of his body. Before long, he threw his canes from his hands and began to run around the church, blessing God, because now he was healed.
Another story of healing is told by witness and author Pearl Zaki.
One girl named Teresa Galila had polio when she was about 6 months old. She could drag her legs with crutches, and she was healed at Zeitoun. And I had seen her walking.
There were other miracles seen as well. The late Bishop Gregorios, during a private interview, told of doves the size of angels that would appear and disappear over the church.
Before they disappeared, they dispersed like cotton.
Bishop Gregorios saw many doves at many different times over the church.
Sometimes there were 7, sometimes there were 12, and they were in a formation.
Bishop Gregorios also witnessed several healings at Zeitoun, including one Muslim woman who was spectacularly healed after paralysis after visiting the church during the apparition. She visited the bishop to show him how the miracle had affected her life.
With a stick in her hand, she said, "I am bringing this stick with me, not because I need it anymore, but to convince you that I was paralyzed, and I was depending on this stick, and now I don't need it."
Even though the Zeitoun apparitions took place 4 decades ago, it is nearly impossible to find anyone in Cairo who didn't see the Virgin Mary themselves, or who knows someone who did. Zeitoun is history's most observed apparition of the Holy Mother. It was a long-running holy event that changed the course of Egyptian history. What was the importance of the appearance of Mary? Bishop Gregorios addresses the question.
Saint Mary is preparing the people for the second coming. But before the second coming, there is the crisis and the Antichrist, who creates other problems.
Bishop Marcos has a different, less apocalyptic view of what the appearance of Saint Mary at Zeitoun means to mankind.
The vision of Saint Mary is intended for all Egyptians, not just the Christians. She gives them peace. She gives them hope, and the belief that tomorrow will be better than today.
On May 4th, 1968, His Holiness Pope Creolus VI announced the findings of a committee of bishops to 150 members of the press. The visions of Zeitoun since April 2nd, 1968 are true, declared the bishops. the Holy Virgin Mary is appearing in her church in Zeitoun. His Holiness the current Pope Shenouda III says that the apparition at Zeitoun is like no other in history. For example, hundreds of thousands of people have been able to see the Virgin. Plus, the apparition lasted almost 3 years, allowing people to come from all over the world to see this marvel. And Zeitoun was accompanied by many miracles, including medical healings, and the presence of pigeon-like objects that flew at night and seemed at times to ascend into the heavens. These and other findings have led author Francis Johnson in his book, When Millions Saw Mary, to call the apparition of Zeitoun the most astonishing public manifestations of the supernatural ever to have occurred on earth.
That was an excellent overview of the astonishing apparitions of Our Lady of Zeitoun. And I think, since most modern Americans are unaware or ill-informed about this subject, it might be helpful to briefly discuss Christianity in Egypt as part of this conversation about Our Lady of Zeitoun. For most Americans, we think of Egypt as a fully Muslim country, but that has not always been the case. Christianity came early to Egypt, and the roots of the church in Egypt run very deep and go back a long, long time. Christianity arrived in Egypt during the Roman era, traditionally through St. Mark's preaching in Alexandria, which quickly became a major center of early Christian scholarship and theology. Many of the giants of our faith had their base in Egypt, specifically in Alexandria, the most important city of the ancient world besides Rome. It really was the intellectual capital of the ancient world. By the 3rd and 4th century, Egypt was also home to the world's first Christian monks and the Desert Fathers, whose spiritual practices shaped global monasticism. Next week, for example, we will be discussing St. Anthony of Egypt, so our Egyptian themes are going to continue for a little bit. And next week, we will also specifically discuss the emphasis on monasticism, which will be explored in much more depth then. One of the conflicts of Coptic Christianity with both the Western Church and Eastern Orthodoxy relates to the Council of Chalcedon. Now, for most Christians today, we don't really know what was behind this conflict, but back in the 5th century, it was quite the controversy. The Council of Chalcedon, held in 451 AD, was the 4th ecumenical council of the Christian Church. It affirmed the Chalcedonian definition, which taught that Christ exists in 2 natures, without confusion, change, division, or separation. This teaching was based in part on the tome of Pope St. Leo I, friend of the show, and was intended to clarify debate surrounding the topic. The Coptic Church rejected the Council's definition, and here's why they rejected it. The Copts followed the theology of St. Cyril of Alexandria, emphasizing one united nature of the Word incarnate. They believed Chalcedon's formula risked dividing Christ into 2 separate beings. Chalcedon was seen as a victory for the imperial church in Constantinople over Alexandria, so there might have been some political machinations going on, but driving some of this conflict. The deposition of Pope Diocrates of Alexandria at the council deepened the rift. The Coptic Church became non-Chalcedonian, meaning Oriental Orthodox, forming a distinct branch of Christianity separate from both Rome and Constantinople. Rome and the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Copts diverged sharply after 451, though modern dialogue has softened some of the theological differences. The theological controversy over Chalcedon has largely cooled in the last couple hundred years, and modern dialogue shows that the Coptic Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches now see their Christological differences as mostly semantic rather than substantive. However, the churches remain officially separate, so the division still exists even though the fight does not. Modern joint commissions, including the official Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox dialogue, have concluded that both sides confess the same faith in Christ, using different language. The Copts hold to the one united nature of the Word incarnate, Miaphysite. The Chalcedonians hold to two natures without confusion or division. Dialogue groups now agree that these two views are compatible, not actually contradictory. Rome and the Coptic Church have signed Christological agreements since the 1970s, affirming that they share the same faith in Christ despite different terminology. Old divisions, though, are sometimes healed very slowly, but there is hope. One very interesting fact about the Coptic Church in Egypt is the fact that they use a different calendar than we use in the rest of the West. The Coptic calendar began in 284 AD, marking the era of the martyrs under Diocletian's persecutions. So where it is 2026 now on our calendar, it is the year 742 AM, where AM stands for after the martyrs. Because of the Chalcedon dispute, Copts in Egypt were oppressed by the Orthodox Byzantine Empire for many years. The Arab conquests from 641 to 642 of Egypt ended Byzantine rule, and Copts initially welcomed the end of imperial oppression, but over the centuries they came to regret this. Islam slowly became dominant through conversion, intermarriage, and social pressures. There was a special tax that was levied on all non-Muslims, called the jizya tax. By the 9th century, Christianity had noticeably declined in numbers. Coptic remained the spoken language for centuries before giving way to Arabic, which is largely what's used now. Despite challenges, the Coptic Church survived, maintaining its hierarchy and liturgy to this day. Today, the Coptic Orthodox Church remains the largest Christian community in the Middle East, representing roughly 10% of Egypt's population and carrying forward a tradition nearly 2 millennia old. It is good to understand some of this background in discussing the events of Zeitoun. 1,500 years of Coptic Christian history is a lot to summarize in only a few minutes, and I'm sure I did not do it justice, but hopefully that at least provides the backdrop for what happened in 1968. And part of what happened in 1968 relates to something that happened 50 years earlier. In 1920, an Egyptian Coptic Christian by the name of Tawfiq Khalil Abraham made plans to build a hotel on the plot of land he owned in the town of Zeitoun. According to Coptic tradition, Zeitoun hosted the Holy Family during their flight to Egypt. However, just before Abraham could begin construction of his hotel, the Virgin Mary appeared to him in a dream and requested that he build a Coptic church on the spot instead. In return, she promised to perform a miracle there. Abraham halted the plans for the hotel and informed his workers that they would be building a church instead. 5 years later, the Coptic Orthodox Church of St. Mary was completed, but no miracle yet. In 1922, Egypt gained independence from Great Britain, and for the next 30 years, Coptics began to see progress in terms of treatment from the Egyptian government, but still no miracle. In the 1940s, World War II raged. Adolf Hitler's forces rampaged Europe, murdering millions of innocent people. At that time, Egypt was officially not involved, but it was occupied by Britain, they sent troops to aid in the war effort, but there was still no miracle. In 1952, Egypt fell under the rule of Colonel Abdel Nasser, a socialist Arab nationalist who targeted the Coptic Christians by limiting their opportunities for schooling and banning them from holding positions of power. But still there was no miracle. Then, on April 2nd, 1968, Mary's promise to Abraham was fulfilled. And another historical event that needs to be understood as being part of the background of the Zeitoun apparitions was the 1967 Arab-Israel War, the Six-Day War. This was an unmitigated disaster for Egypt, and especially for President Nasser, and also the relations between Coptic Christians and their Muslim neighbors. A preemptive strike by Israel against the Egyptian airfields destroyed the Egyptian Air Force, while simultaneously an Israeli ground offensive at the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula caught the Egyptian army completely by surprise, inflicting heavy losses and mass confusion. There were fewer than 1,000 Israeli soldiers that were killed, compared to over 20,000 of the Arab forces. In just 5 days, the Air Force was decimated, tens of thousands were killed, and the Sinai Peninsula was seized. Egyptian national pride and regional credibility were severely compromised, and Egyptian President Abdel Nasser's regime was discredited. Unable to bear the seismic failure and embarrassment, the president, in a public broadcast on June 9th, stepped down. But the people of Egypt demanded that he retract his resignation, and Pope Cyrillus of the Coptic Church helped convince him to remain in office. Unfortunately, the defeat in the Six-Day War caused massive problems for the Coptic community. Accusations of Christian espionage against the Egyptian forces arose, and the Coptic Church that was associated with Christianity, which was associated with the West, thus came under suspicion. In some ways, we are still dealing with the aftershocks of this war, as much of the start of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt began as a result of this defeat. Now, many of you watching this morning in the United States may be asking yourself, why have I never heard of this apparition before? I mean, such a widely witnessed supernatural event like this should have captured the attention of the world's media like nothing else. Well, the reason it really didn't catch the attention of the world's media is that April of 1968, when the apparitions began, were probably some of the most news-packed months in modern history. This was huge news in Egypt, of course, but in the United States, we were wrapped up in the events of the assassination of Martin Luther King, which also happened in April of 1968. The Vietnam War, the sexual revolution, student protests from Paris to Mexico City, and the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. The public in Europe and America just weren't very interested in these apparitions compared to all this other news going on. And although there was some coverage, for example, on May 4th, 1968, the New York Times featured a short article with the headline, "Visions of the Virgin Reported in Cairo." For most of the West, it largely went undocumented. One side note to consider, however, is that after the apparitions of Our Lady of Zeitoun, peace did come at last to Egypt, eventually. In 1978, 10 years after the apparitions, the Camp David Accords were signed, and Israel returned the entire Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. And in 1979, the Egyptian-Israeli Peace Treaty was signed. Egypt recognized Israel as a legitimate state, and full diplomatic relations, including an exchange of ambassadors, were established in 1980. Despite continuing tensions, the two countries are strategic partners, and the peace between them has held for over 40 years. Is it possible that Our Lady's message of peace from Zeitoun had some effect on this? It does make one wonder. And although peace has been achieved with Egypt and Israel, persecution of the Coptic minority still occurs. We all remember the memory of the 21 Coptic martyrs killed by ISIS over 10 years ago. The blood of the martyrs continues to seed the church in Egypt. And tragically, the church itself was bombed by ISIS a few years ago, killing at least 25 worshippers. So, that is at least a brief overview of the historical background surrounding Our Lady of Zeitoun. Next, we will turn to what exactly happened, especially at the very beginning of the apparitions. The first apparition of the Virgin Mary at Zeitoun was recorded on the evening of the 2nd of April, 1968. The phenomenon was seen by two Muslim bus mechanics who claimed to witness a woman dressed in white on the roof of St. Mary's Church, and one thought she was a nun about to attempt suicide by leaping from the roof and called for the police. Intrigued by the mechanics yelling, "Don't jump," a crowd gathered at the site. The police attempted to disperse them, saying that the sighting was just a reflection of the light from the street lamps. However, a church custodian suggested the figure was the Virgin Mary, which greatly excited the crowd. The event itself ended after only a few minutes. One of the witnesses was a man named Farouk Muhammad Atwa, a Muslim mechanic, and he was one of the mechanics working across the street from the church. When he saw the woman standing on top of the roof, he also believed she was about to commit suicide, so he ran to get help. You will hear more about him and his miraculous healing later. This first apparition only lasted just a few minutes, but it was the first of many to come. 1 week later, on April 9th, the phenomenon reoccurred, again lasting for only a few minutes. After that time, apparitions became more frequent, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, for several years, ending in 1971. There are innumerable photos of the apparition, of which this is just one of many. This picture is probably one of the most famous of them. The apparitions were thoroughly investigated by the local authorities at the time, and no device was found within a radius of 15 miles capable of projecting such an image. And many of the photos that were taken of the Blessed Virgin Mary were by independent photographers, with no alternative explanation and approval from religious and political officials. The Egyptian government accepted the apparitions as true and valid. As word spread of the apparitions of the Virgin Mary, the crowds grew exponentially in size. Estimates of the number of observers of the event vary greatly. Thousands were said to have flocked to the church soon after the first announcement of the occurrences, and then eventually the crowd sizes grew to 250,000 as the upper limit for a single night. Though the difficulty in estimating crowd size in the dark means the number of people in the crowd may have been significantly larger or smaller, but just from this picture that you can see from the paper at the time, it was an enormous, large group of people that were there. It is estimated that from 1968 to 1971, at least 1 million Egyptians and numerous foreigners saw this luminous female figure atop the church's roof. The apparitions most frequently occurred on feast days, some lasting several minutes, but the longest went on for up to 9 hours. Almost immediately after the apparitions began, the Coptic Church sprang into action. The Patriarch of the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria, Pope Kyrillus VI, appointed a committee of high-ranking priests and bishops to investigate the matter, and it was directed by Bishop Gregorius, a bishop of postgraduate studies, Coptic cultures, and scientific research. I will say it's pretty cool to have a bishop of scientific research. On May 4th, Pope Kyrillus issued an official statement confirming the apparitions as valid. Soon afterward, the Ministry of Tourism also issued a validation of the sightings and began printing pamphlets. Since the apparition appeared over a Coptic church, the Vatican left the investigation to Coptic authorities. The Coptic Church quickly recognized these apparitions. Blessed Pope Paul VI sent 2 envoys to Zeitoun when the apparitions originally occurred. While the Pope received favorable accounts, the Vatican would not officially comment upon the authenticity of the apparitions since they occurred in an Orthodox church. Still, many Egyptian Copts, both Orthodox and Catholics, found them very moving. The local envoy to the Pope personally witnessed the apparition on several occasions and made his own private report to the Pope himself. President Nasser himself was a witness to these apparitions, and images of them were photographed by newspaper photographers, and video of the apparitions were shown on Egyptian television. Investigations performed by the police could find no apparent explanation of a naturalistic method for these events to occur. Individuals at all levels of society, from a garage mechanic to the president of the country, and all faiths, from Muslim to Christian to even atheists, witnessed and reported seeing visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Zeitoun. It was, and still is today, the single most witnessed supernatural event in history. Many witnesses recall Mary holding an olive branch in her hand, a symbol of peace, that then, like now, was so desperately needed in the Middle East. She was blessing the crowds, bowing in front of the cross, and walking across the church's domes. In addition to the Blessed Virgin Mary, many witnesses also report seeing luminous doves flying at night, which these birds do not normally do, and bright colors flashing, reminiscent of the miracle of the sun in Fatima. Sometimes Mary was seen accompanied by St. Joseph, or cradling Jesus, who appeared to be about 12 years old in the apparition. Many recall the scent of incense in Zeitoun. As in Lourdes, many miraculous healings occurred and were confirmed by non-Christian medical professionals, as were numerous conversions. Interestingly enough, Mary said nothing at Zeitoun, choosing to communicate through silence. Here's another screenshot taken from a video of the event showing those doves. It's just amazing. Disturbed by the growing crowds, Egypt's secular authorities and police ordered an intensive investigation of these unusual events. However, they could find no lighting, projectors, or any other devices necessary to pull off a hoax within the 15-mile radius of St. Mary's Church. The only secular English language account of the events was provided by Cynthia Nelson, a professor of anthropology at the American University in Cairo. She visited the church site on several occasions, including on April 15, 1968, and then another week later near the end of April, and then again on June 1st, 1968. Despite reports of regular appearances of the Virgin Mary, Nelson did not see anything that could be identified clearly as such. Instead, she only saw a few intermittent flashes of light that she considered to be headlights at first, and later a glow of an ambiguous shape shining through the palm trees. But, she admitted, the source of the light was a mystery, for the streetlights had been disconnected all around the church for several days. There are thousands, many thousand, examples of eyewitness testimony about what they witnessed, and they include people from all walks of life: local residents, government officials, journalists, and international visitors. Many of the people that saw this vision reported healings, feelings of peace, and spiritual renewal after witnessing the Blessed Virgin Mary. The events were widely covered in Egyptian and in some international media, and photographs were taken showing a luminous figure over the church dome from every conceivable angle. There are thousands of these pictures available. While some skeptics question the authenticity of the photos, the sheer number of the witnesses and the reams of photographic evidence made the Zeitoun apparitions one of the most documented supernatural phenomenon in modern times. And analyzing the phenomenon, you can see that they all fall into several distinct categories. The most famous and prominent are the full-body apparitions, such as this photo of Mary's luminous figure clothed in white, or sometimes in a blue robe, or holding an olive branch. Other phenomena include these brilliant balls of light that would appear and that sometimes would actually transform into the image in the apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I mentioned earlier how, as part of the investigation, the police had disconnected all the street lamps to prevent any possibility of these apparitions being part of a reflection coming off the lights. When the apparitions continued, they actually cut the power to the whole neighborhood. And when they did this, and this was on April 30th, 1968, the apparition that day not only appeared, but was brighter than normal, and it actually lasted for 2 hours. Another bit of evidence that proves that this was no hoax is the fact that the apparition did not always show up at the same exact spot. Like on the dome. The apparition was also seen near the base of the dome, and sometimes in the courtyard between the trees, while on other occasions it was seen mid-air above the dome, as is shown in this just amazing photo, because you get the full 3D shot of it, of the image. It is highly significant that the apparition was not confined to a single location, because that means that whatever possible naturalistic explanation could be offered, and so far there hasn't been one, to explain this event, would need to be able to account for all 3 of these locations. So far, none has been found. Sometimes the apparition was motionless and described as statue-like. Other times it appeared it was moving, usually floating without using its feet. It was usually shown making gestures with her head and her hands, and in particular, these gestures were commonly understood by witnesses to be the Virgin Mary blessing the people. Many claimed to be able to distinguish a face, eyes, and mouth, and even resembling actions seen in religious icons. Yet others noted that there was a light, but they could not distinguish anything particular. As one would expect, it is normal to have variations in descriptions provided by eyewitnesses. One surprising thing I discovered in researching this case is that there is no complete list of the apparitions. One of the reasons is there's just so many of them. The Coptic Church identified 27 apparitions during the period of from April 2nd, 1968 to May 4th, 1968. There was a decline, if you chart this, in the number of apparitions throughout 1968 to 1 or 2 a week. And then the frequency went down to once a month by early 1970. The last apparition occurred on May 29th, 1971. So the apparitions thus stretched from the beginning of April 1968 to May or June of 1971, a period of basically 3 years and 2 months. If you graph this, the apparitions occurred against the crowd size. It's interesting to see what pops out, that the lines don't exactly match, but it seems that the most apparitions occurred when the crowds were the largest, which you could interpret as God rewarding the faith of the people that were showing up. Eric Wett, a researcher on this topic, writes that there were only a few witnesses the first day, as it was a completely unexpected event. It eventually grew to a very large gathering, and a witness stated that there were between 100 people to 150 on the night of April 13, 1968. Between 1,000 and 1,500 people showed up on April 15, 1968. And after that, the phenomenon was discussed for the first time in the mainstream press, and through April 23, 1968. The crowd grew enormously after that, and the bishop estimated that there were 100,000 people there to witness the Blessed Virgin Mary on the night of April 29th, from which this picture is picture taken that night. It finally reached an estimated 250,000 nightly onlookers after a few weeks, according to this researcher, by the end of 1968. The crowd then dwindled down to about 10,000 people a night by June 1971. And then by the end, there were just a handful of people showing up. Some estimates guess that over this period of time, over 1 million people witnessed this amazing event. The Patriarch of the Coptic Church held a press conference in May about this event that was attended by more than 150 reporters. And overseeing the press conference were 4 bishops. The statement of the Patriarch is as follows. Since the evening of April 2nd, 1968, the apparition of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Light, continuously occurred in the Coptic Orthodox Church after her name, on Tanby Street in the Zeitoun district in Cairo. This apparition occurred on many different nights and happened in many different forms, sometimes with the whole body, sometimes with the upper half surrounded by a halo of light, sometimes from the windows of the domes in the church, and other times outside the domes. Now, you may be wondering what the reaction of the Catholic Church was, since the apparition was happening at a Coptic parish. It really wasn't the place of the Catholic Church to make an official pronouncement. But the local head of the Coptic Catholic Church, Cardinal Stephanos I, had an informal investigation conducted, and based on this investigation, he concurred with the Coptic Patriarch, and Cardinal Stephanos stated that it is no doubt a real appearance confirmed by many Coptic Catholic parishioners. Over the 3-year span of these apparitions, Mary never uttered a word. She remained in a constant state of prayer, and her actions and body language spoke volumes. Sometimes she would glide around the domes that decorated the church's roof. Other times she fell to her knees before the cross above the front entrance. At times she stood still as a statue for hours on end, her flowing garments the only indication of her corporeality. Occasionally, she would acknowledge the crowds with a gentle smile and a silent blessing. And another part of this phenomenon that showed up almost as often as the apparition of the Blessed Virgin Mary herself were these doves. Here's a picture showing large glowing doves flying in formation. Sometimes they were in the shape of a cross, and sometimes they were just in pairs, but they were often part of the phenomenon. Commonly referred to by many as angels, they would appear and disappear over the church before they disappeared. They dispersed like cotton. Bishop Gregorio saw many doves at many different times over the church. Sometimes there were 7, sometimes there were as many as 12, and they were in formation almost all the time. Many witnesses reported that they were luminous. They never came to rest on the roof or trees, and on some occasions they were seen to have disintegrate into the sky like wisps of a cloud. They varied in number on different nights. They sometimes appeared singly or in 2s or 3s or even larger groups, but always in some kind of formation. Another commonly reported part of this phenomenon was incense. Many times a fragrant incense-like smoke could be observed rising around the Virgin Mary, either right before she appeared or right after she left. Bishop Gregorius described the appearance of clouds of deep reddish incense, which billowed in huge quantities all around the church during these apparitions. Sometimes they rose to a height of 30 to 60 feet, and they were clearly visible above and around the church against the colorless sky. Author Perlzaki described that sometimes these clouds appeared like a thick fog that would roll in towards the church as if they were being channeled down the streets in all directions, to completely cover the church and spread over the crowd and the church like a canopy. The sky would then turn into a deep reddish purple color. At various occasions, the clouds were accompanied by the clap of thunder and a strong smell of incense. Sometimes the entire church, especially the dome, would take on a glow, a phosphorescent glow. Not just the apparition, but the entire church. Sparkles and stars also were witnessed, reportedly looking like a flame right before the apparition would appear. Lights on one occasion appeared as falling stars, and on another occasion, even as a shower of diamonds of light, swirling in the path of the lady's movements, or forming over her head as a brilliant crown. Farooq Muhammad Atwa, the guy who was the first witness of the apparition, was Muslim, and he also, at the time of the apparition, was suffering with gangrene in his finger, and he was actually scheduled to have the finger amputated the next day. The next day, when he went to have the amputation done, and they took the bandages off, they found that the gangrene had miraculously been healed. This, along with many other healings, were investigated and medically verified. There were a large number of reports of miraculous healings of blindness, paralysis, cancer, and other illnesses connected with the apparitions. I mean, for example, just to name one, is the name of Mr. Riyad Naguib. Naguib had developed a retinal detachment due to a rupture of the retinal vein in his right eye. The internal hemorrhage had continued for 21 days, followed by a clot in front of the retina. A group of ophthalmologists announced that it had no treatment for this, and there was no cure either in Egypt or anywhere else. He was miraculously healed after visiting Zeitoun, and his documented miraculous cure has baffled skeptics for decades. And there were even people healed that weren't there to be healed. They were kind of healed by accident. One of the cases that I just find very interesting is a Mr. Wagig Ritzak Mata. He was a photographer that had come to take pictures of the event, and when he returned home, he found that an old car accident injury on his arm had been completely healed after he had seen the vision. I mean, he wasn't there for a healing, but he got one anyway. And so there's just another one of many examples I could give. Even with the news-heavy month of April 1968, the news did get out. I mean, here's an example from Omaha, Nebraska, which reported on the event. Continuing on with the healings, I mean, another one, and again, this could go on for a while, so I'll sum it up. But there was a Dr. William Zaki who had suffered from a hernia for 13 years. After praying at the church, he found it was completely cured without pain. Bishop Gregorius reported that he and other servants witnessed a miracle themselves while standing at the north yard of the church. They saw a blind and paralyzed woman entering the church in a wheelchair, and she had come to the church following the Virgin Mary's promise to her that had come to her in a dream, that if you come to Zeitoun, you will be cured. She came to the church, and when the lady stepped into the church, they saw her immediately start to stand up, and moving towards the church, she left the wheelchair behind, and it just ran around the church screaming songs of joy and praise. And it wasn't just sick people who reported the healings, or religious people. Doctors who had examined the sick also confirmed the miracles. And some of these doctors were skeptics, and this greatly challenged their naturalistic worldview. Case in point was one prominent chirosurgeon who expressed this existential dilemma in the following narrative. Here's what he said. A patient of mine, upon whom I had operated 2 years ago for cancer, returned to my office 3 weeks ago for a checkup. Upon examination, I discovered that the man had another tumor. I actually felt the tumor during the internal examination and removed a piece of the tissue for a biopsy. When the test showed that it was malignant, I recommended an immediate operation. But the man refused, saying he did not have enough money, and left the office. 2 weeks later, he returned and asked for another examination. And to my astonishment, I could not find the tumor, but only some white scar tissue. The man told me he had gone to Zeitoun and prayed to the Virgin for help. I did not believe in such miracles, but I cannot explain the disappearance of the tumor, and it is driving me mad. So you can see even the skeptics were baffled by these miraculous healings. In addition to the sightings of the apparition, the glowing birds, the incense, and the healings, there are many examples of sudden and dramatic conversions of Muslims to Christianity. Now, this is a very sensitive issue in Egypt, as you can imagine, but a few examples stand out. One was a neighborhood mechanic that had no interest in Christianity. He had lived only a few blocks from the Coptic church of St. Mary in Zeitoun. He was a Muslim man in his early 40s, a mechanic by trade, known in the neighborhood as a practical, skeptical, and not easily impressed person by religious excitement. When the crowds began gathering around the church in April 1968, he had dismissed it as pure hysteria. People see what they want to see, he told his friends. But the crowds kept growing, Muslims, Christians, atheists, government officials, all claiming to see a woman of light on the church dome. He finally decided to go see for himself. One warm evening, he pushed through the crowd. The air buzzed with murmurs, prayers, the clicking of cameras. Suddenly, the crowd gasped, a wave of awe rolling outward like a shock. He looked up, and there she was, a woman made of pure white light, standing on the dome of the church, not flickering, not a trick of the eye, solid, radiant, peaceful. She moved slowly, blessing the crowd with a gesture of her hand. He felt something break open inside of him, a warmth, a clarity, a presence he could not explain. He later told neighbors that this had been one of the most moving experiences of his life. He went home shaken. He could not sleep. He kept replaying the vision in his mind, the light, the peace, the unmistakable sense that God had visited his neighborhood. The next morning, he did something no one expected. He took a brush, dipped it in white paint, and began painting crosses on the outside walls of his house. Not small ones, not hidden ones, large, bold crosses, visible from across the street. Neighbors stopped and stared. Some asked if he had lost his mind. Others whispered that he must have converted. He simply said it meant that he had converted. Painting crosses, by the way, in 1968, Egypt on your house, was not a casual act. It was very dangerous. It was socially costly. It was a public declaration that something profound had happened to him. Some say he quietly sought baptism later. Others say he remained a Muslim, but became a defender of Christians and a believer in Mary's intercession. Either way, the message was unmistakable. The apparition had changed him forever. And there are innumerable examples of stories like this. Many stories. Throughout this presentation, I have been providing evidence of where the Egyptian authorities took many steps early to ensure that these apparitions were not part of some elaborate hoax. To their immense credit, they were quite diligent in their investigations, and so it is obvious that certain phenomena could not possibly have been faked. Much of the action involved the domed roof of the church, where the Virgin Mary appeared and where these mysterious birds materialized. The windows in the dome do not open, and they are 50 feet above the floor below, as you can see here from this picture. To get up there, scaffolding would be required, even to get up to the windows. And even if you did get up there, they wouldn't open anyway. So the source of the apparitions and the smoke of the incense could not have come from inside the church without being noticed. And it would have definitely been noticed because you had all the eyes of Egypt focused on this one spot. Some skeptics have suggested that the apparition was created by a spotlight or some other device. Again, that would have been almost impossible to do without detection. Spotlights are quite easy to identify because they cut through the haze in the air and betray their presence, as this picture shows. Cairo, especially in the 1960s, was notorious for its smog, so it would have definitely shown up. Also, the figure of the woman was reported to descend from the roof to the garden below the church. Spotlights don't do that, nor do they show a 3D image that can be observed from multiple sides in midair. So I think we can safely eliminate a spotlight as being the cause of this. As was stated earlier, the electricity to the whole area was shut off in order to nail down any possibility that this was a hoax being done by some sort of projector. When the power was cut off, the apparition only grew more intense. And any kind of generator or battery-operated spotlight that could have been used would have been easy to spot, especially in a crowd of 250,000 people. A thorough inquiry of the incident was made by the Cairo Police Department, and they released the results of their investigation. And I'm going to read from it here. Here's the report of General Information and Complaints Department from Cairo, Egypt in 1968. Official investigations have been carried out with the result that it has been considered an undeniable fact that the Blessed Virgin Mary has been appearing on Zeitoun Church in a clear and bright luminous body, seen by all present in front of the church, whether Christians or Muslims. So it appears that the police department of Cairo came to their own conclusions on this matter. Naturally, the Marian apparitions in Zeitoun have their share of skeptics. Most of them offer psychological explanations for the event. For example, Robert Bartholomew and Eric Good write the following. It appears that the Marian observers were predisposed by religious background and social expectation to interpreting the light displays as related to the Virgin Mary. And now the problem with this explanation is that more than 8 in 10 Egyptians are Sunni Muslim, while according to most estimates, only about 10 to 15% of the country's inhabitants are Christians, overwhelmingly Orthodox Copts. So it doesn't add up. And although many Muslims do respect Mary, in fact, she is the only woman mentioned in the Quran, her cultural significance in Islam is nowhere near as momentous as that in Christianity, especially Coptic Christianity. Other potential naturalistic explanations to this light that might involve a hoaxer involve the use of phosphorus or other chemicals to make the woman or the dove glow. Now, the problem with this theory is phosphorus and other chemically created lights are more of the soft glow category, such as you see here. The things and the visions of the apparition are very bright lights that are shown from the photographic evidence. There is no known chemical that we know of that could have created this sort of light through chemical means. Back to our friends Robert Bartholomew and Eric Good, going to take another whack at this theory to come up with some naturalistic sociological explanation. For this is their explanation was that this came from a mass hysteria that was resulting from the tumultuous current events that had gone on in Egypt in the recent years. I mean, Egypt had seen a recent shift from real faith to human-made ideas and belief systems, specifically due to the loss of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War that I talked about earlier. And because of this increased humanism, they suggest, those who witnessed the apparitions were predisposed by religious background and social expectation to assume that the mysterious lights were in some way related to the Virgin Mary. Michael Carroll, a professor of sociology at the University of Western Ontario, suggests that the lights of uncertain origin were merely interpreted by the crowd to be Mary due to societal stress and Mary's historical and religious association with Zeitoun. Again, the same argument I'm going to use on this theory that I used on the one before. Mass hysteria does not show up on film. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. And without sounding too snarky, which I know I can be a little snarky if I put my mind to it, I can't help but think of this quote. I think it's from H.L. Mencken, but I think it applies here, especially with these obviously very talented and educated sociologists, Robert Bartholomew and Eric Good, and others like them. That basically the quote is, there are some ideas, and their idea about the explanation for Zeitoun, I think, falls into this category, that are so insane and so obviously wrong that it takes many, many advanced degrees to believe them. I think that might be what's going on here with Robert Bartholomew and Eric Good. And while we're on the subject of insane ideas that are obviously wrong, here's one from John S. Durr and Michael Persinger, who propose, this as the explanation for Zeitoun, that they came from earthquake lights. It's part of their tectonic strain theory. It's the idea that the occurrence of earthquakes cause the appearance of strange lights. Zeitoun did see some tectonic activity prior to the events of 1968 and 1971. Therefore, the source of the lights could have been a byproduct of this seismic activity. Appearances of the lights only at night would be possible, as such lights might not be visible during daytime. However, the tectonic strain theory has yet to provide a mechanism for how tectonic lights events could cause these lights. These earthquakes that they claim possibly generated the Zeitoun apparitions were hundreds of miles away. Here's a couple big problems with this theory. One, there've never been any proof that earthquake lights are actually a thing. This is just all a theory that they have. But here's a big one. Let's just assume for the time being that earthquakes can sometimes show up as with weird lights in the sky. How exactly is an earthquake from 400 miles away going to generate an image of a young woman exactly on the church that bears her name over a period of 3 years? That, if you're going to believe that, that seems a lot harder to believe than to believe that the Virgin Mary showed up. That seems a lot more plausible to me. I'm sorry, I know I'm a religious person and so I have my own worldview, but this earthquake light theory is just bonkers. To me, I am someone who is very interested in Marian apparitions. I mean, I always have been. It's good to put Zeitoun into perspective by comparing it to the other most famous apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So we're going to do a little summary here. So we've been talking about Zeitoun, which took place in Zeitoun near Cairo, Egypt, over a period of 3 years. It was witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people sometimes at a time. One time, even up to 250,000 in one night saw this event. There were luminous figures of the Virgin Mary, glowing doves, incense like smoke, and numerous miraculous healings and conversions. It was confirmed by the Coptic Church in 1968 and later accepted by the Egyptian government as the official explanation of the events. So that's Zeitoun in a nutshell. The other Marian apparition of the 20th century that is famous, oddly, is more famous than Zeitoun, although I think Zeitoun probably should be more famous, was from Fatima in 1917, from Fatima, Portugal. I talk about it every year. It occurred over a period of 6 months, from May to October on 1917. The Virgin Mary was only witnessed by the 3 shepherd children. So it wasn't witnessed by thousands of people. They only were the only ones who saw her. Now, tens of thousands of people witnessed the miracle of the sun, which I talked about back in October. Mary gave visions of hell and other secrets to the children at Fatima. Mary was silent in Zeitoun. That's one distinction. The miracle of the sun was witnessed by upwards of 70,000 people back in October 13th, 1917. And it was recognized by the Catholic Church as a verified apparition of the Blessed Virgin in 1930. Then you have Lourdes, France, in 1858. There were 18 apparitions of the Virgin Mary over 5 months. But, similar to Fatima, these apparitions were only seen by St. Bernadette. There were growing crowds that came to watch Bernadette as she interacted with the Virgin Mary, but she was the only one that saw Mary. There was a miraculous spring of healing water, and there were many healings that were reported, and still are today. There are still healings at Lourdes. It was recognized by the Catholic Church in 1862. Then, of course, you have Our Lady of Guadalupe. I just talked about her last month. I did a whole podcast on her. I'm a big fan of Our Lady of Guadalupe. This goes back to 1531 at Tepeyac Hill in Mexico. There were 4 apparitions over 4 days, so dramatically smaller number than you have at Zeitoun. The Virgin Mary only appeared to Juan Diego and his uncle. So there were not a huge mass sighting of the Virgin. Only Juan Diego and his uncle actually saw the Virgin. The image of Mary was imprinted on the tilma, and gave her image after being given miraculous roses that shouldn't bloom in December. And this, Our Lady of Guadalupe, was recognized by the Catholic Church in 1555. Unlike most Marian apparitions, Zeitoun was not tied to secret messages or a single visionary, but instead it was a collective experience involving upwards of 1 million people over a period of 3 years. It bridged faiths between Muslims and Christians. They all saw it in all walks of life, and it offered hope to Egypt during a time of crisis. Its sheer scale makes it one of the most extraordinary Marian events in history. And that's why I think one of the goals I have for this particular episode is to make this better known. It should be better known outside of Egypt. I mean, it is just an amazing event that happened back in Zeitoun, Egypt in 1968. And more people need to know about it. Now, if you remember, I got a little snarky a couple slides back when I was talking about crazy theories by naturalists to explain away Zeitoun because it interferes with their worldview. That's how you get the earthquake lights and this mass hysteria theory that just it's just laughably false. It doesn't match up with the evidence. Well, I'm going to kind of draw a bead a little bit on people of my own tribe somewhat. I mean, I know I'm a high churchy Anglican, but technically I'm still Protestant. And I will say that many people of the Protestant denominations, they don't know what to do with Zeitoun, and it could be a bit of embarrassing sometimes. And I'll give you an example. Famed internet atheist Alex O'Connor, also known as a cosmic skeptic, you see him on the left, was in a debate with Dr. William Lane Craig, who is in the center. And I'm a big William Lane Craig fan. I've been for years. I mean, great guy. He wrote the book Reasonable Faith, and he's a famed Christian apologist and a personal hero of mine. But Alex O'Connor asked Craig a very pointed and direct question during one of their debates over Christianity, specifically on the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And Craig was arguing with O'Connor on the evidence of eyewitness testimony that he uses as part of his reasons that he believes the resurrection is true. By the way, I also believe that the resurrection is true for the same reasons that William Lane Craig cites the eyewitness testimony. But when O'Connor asked him why he did not use the same criteria that he uses for the resurrection on Marian apparitions, and he specifically cited Zeitoun, which has 1 billion people that saw it, Craig was at a loss. He didn't know how to respond. And you could see him struggle with this because as a Protestant, accepting a Marian apparition is true is really going to go against his theology. And that is something everyone needs to be aware of. Don't let your theology determine what you can or cannot accept as evidence. I mean, that is just weak. I mean, that is just like those guys coming up with the earthquake light theory because they can't believe in a miracle, thinking that this can't be the Virgin Mary because my church doesn't think the Virgin Mary can come to earth. That's just weak. And it's also a good policy not to let your theology get in the way of your common sense. And always remember this, which I think is a good gauge to go by. Good trees bear good fruit, and bad trees bear bad fruit. And Zeitoun has produced a bumper crop of good fruit. So that should make the people who are a little worried about accepting Zeitoun a little less anxious. Everybody just needs to calm down and just accept the evidence where it leads. As we begin to wrap up today of our discussions of Our Lady of Zeitoun, there's a little historical note that on May 12th, 2018, the Coptic Church celebrated the Golden Jubilee of the event, and a large number of priests and Christians from all over Egypt and the world attended the celebration. And something to watch coming up, because I can easily see this turning into a podcast in the future. But Zeitoun wasn't the only site of Marian apparitions in modern-day Egypt. And this one's very recent. From August 2000 to January 2001, thousands reported to have seen Mary appear at Assiut, Assiut, I'm probably mispronouncing it, one of the Christian cities in Egypt. Copts make up a half of Assiut's population. Many of the same elements as Zeitoun were reported. The smell of incense, luminous doves, and Mary walking across the church's rooftop. If you go on YouTube right now and type in Marian apparitions in Assiut, Egypt, there's some amazing video that was captured. It's incredible. Like Zeitoun, Assiut is one of the places believed to have been visited by the Holy Family during his flight to Egypt. So this could easily turn into a podcast one day, but look it up. It's really, really interesting and some amazing video footage. So we will end our discussion of Our Lady of Zeitoun today with the prayer for the feast day of the Blessed Virgin Mary that we normally celebrate back in August. Now, there isn't a prayer for Our Lady of Zeitoun in our prayer book yet, but who knows, maybe this episode will inspire someone to write one. There should be. So we will end with this prayer. And here we go. O God, you have taken to yourself the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of your incarnate Son. Grant that we, who have been redeemed by his blood, may share with her the glory of your eternal kingdom. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. Next week, we'll be exploring yet another hero from our Christian past. So be sure to tune in. Until then, keep your faith warm, your cappuccino hot and frothy, and have a great week. See you next week for another Saturday Cappuccino with the Saints.